There's a particular kind of film that refuses to age, not because it was polished or safe, but because it was fought for. Bullitt is that kind of film. Released in 1968 and starring Steve McQueen as the cool, unflappable San Francisco detective Frank Bullitt. It has spent more than 5 decades earning a reputation that goes far beyond its genre. Most people who love this movie think they understand what made it great. The car chase, McQueen's effortless presence, the authentic feel of a real city captured on film. But almost everything audiences take for granted as natural or inevitable was, in reality, the result of confrontation, accident, stubbornness, and creative warfare conducted behind a camera at every stage of production. The true story of how this film came to exist is almost as thrilling as the film itself, and most of it has never been fully appreciated by the audiences who made it classic. Start with the most celebrated element of the entire movie, the car chase, and you immediately encounter a fact that should reframe everything. That chase, the one that defined the film, inspired generations of filmmakers, and still appears on lists of the greatest action sequences ever committed to celluloid, was never part of the original screenplay. Alan Trustman adapted the film from Robert L. Pike's novel Mute Witness, and his script was fundamentally a story about political tension and procedural detective work. There were no high-speed pursuits written into those pages. The chase only began taking shape during the development process, and how it ultimately got there's a question that nobody involved in the production ever fully agreed on. Director Peter Yates maintained that the sequence grew from a desire to show San Francisco in motion and capture the city's energy in a way that felt cinematic and alive. Steve McQueen, whose passion for racing in his private life ran deeper than almost anything else, saw it as an opportunity to ground the film in physical reality, rather than the kind of staged, artificial action that Hollywood had been producing for decades. Trustman himself argued that the framework for such a sequence existed in his writing. Nobody's account fully aligns with anyone else's. What matters is that the chase emerged not from a single clear vision, but from the friction between multiple competing visions, none of which fully controlled the outcome. A sequence that felt inevitable and perfectly conceived was actually the product of collaboration, argument, and instinct working against each other until something extraordinary emerged from a collision. Before a single frame was shot, there was a war being fought between Steve McQueen and the studio that was financing the film. Warner Brothers executives were deeply uncomfortable with the idea of shooting a major Hollywood production on the actual streets of San Francisco. Real city locations meant unpredictable logistics, costs that were far harder to manage, and physical risks that no controlled soundstage environment would ever present. Studio leadership pushed hard to bring production back to Los Angeles, where sets could be constructed, schedules could be controlled, and the variables could be managed. McQueen refused. Through a production company, Solar Productions, he had enough leverage to push back against the studio's pressure, but the confrontation cost him goodwill that he would feel throughout the production. For McQueen, shooting on real San Francisco streets was not a stylistic preference. It was a creative requirement so fundamental to the film's identity that compromising on it would have meant making an entirely different movie. A fabricated version of San Francisco built on a studio backlit would have stripped away the texture, the honesty, the lived-in quality that he believed the character and the story demanded. The standoff ended with McQueen winning, and the production remained in San Francisco. Every authentic street corner, every real neighborhood, every genuine piece of the city that audiences experience in the finished film exists because one actor chose to fight a battle that most people in his position would have avoided entirely. Once the decision to film in San Francisco was secured, the production faced another challenge entirely. Filming in a major American city requires access, and access requires negotiation. What the Bullitt production achieved in terms of that negotiation was nearly unprecedented for the era. San Francisco city officials agreed to open real locations to the crew, including police stations, hospitals, and entire residential neighborhoods, for extended shooting schedules. This was not a handful of quick exterior shots dressed up with production design to suggest authenticity. The crew embedded itself in the city's actual infrastructure. The negotiations reportedly involved assurances that the film would portray San Francisco respectfully and with genuine prominence. City leaders understood the promotional value of a major Hollywood production, showcasing their streets to national and international audiences. And in return, they offered a level of cooperation that went well beyond standard film permits. Entire blocks were cleared for filming. Local officials helped coordinate traffic control for key sequences. The result of all that negotiation was a film that became inseparable from its setting in a way that is genuinely rare. San Francisco wasn't used as a backdrop in Bullitt. It became a character with its own weight, its own personality, its own presence in every scene. The fog, the steep grades, the texture of real neighborhoods gave the film an authenticity that no constructed environment could have replicated. Long before cameras rolled, McQueen had developed a precise and unusual vision for how Frank Bullitt should carry himself, and it had nothing to do with conventional police thrillers. He saw the character as a frontier lawman transplanted into a modern urban environment, someone who operated by instinct and personal code rather than by institutional procedure. This Western sensibility became the foundation for virtually every choice McQueen made on screen. It extended far beyond attitude into wardrobe, movement, and posture. The understated turtleneck, the simple leather holster, the complete absence of flashy accessories. Every element was deliberately restrained, echoing the quiet authority of classic Western heroes rather than the frantic, expressive energy that audiences typically expected from crime films set in American cities. The result gave the film a tone that felt entirely distinct from its genre peers. Where other late 1960s thrillers leaned into gritty realism or stylized violence, Bullitt carried a calm, almost meditative quality. Bullitt didn't chase chaos. He waited for it to come to him. That patience, drawn directly from the Western tradition, gave the character a gravity that no amount of dialogue could have achieved. It was a performance constructed almost entirely from silence and physical control. One of the most surprising facts about the famous chase is a location that isn't in it. Early discussion seriously considered staging part of the pursuit across the Golden Gate Bridge, a setting that would have given the sequence one of the most recognizable backdrops in the world. On paper, it seemed like a natural fit. Permission was denied. Bridge authorities were unwilling to allow dangerous high-speed filming on the structure. The concerns around closing lanes, managing safety risks, and protecting the bridge from potential damage made the proposal entirely impractical, and the filmmakers were forced to abandon the idea and rethink the route entirely. What initially seemed like a frustrating setback turned out to be one of the most important accidents in the film's production history. Without the bridge, the pursuit was rerouted through San Francisco's steep residential hills. The sharp drops, the blind crests, the narrow streets, all of the visual characteristics that made the chase so unmistakably itself emerged directly from that rejection. A flat, wide bridge would have delivered speed, but not danger. The hills delivered both, along with a sense of geographic unpredictability that no famous landmark could have matched. What began as a creative obstacle became the chase's greatest visual strength. Behind the wheel of the Black Charger was a performer whose contribution to the film was just as essential as anything happening in front of the camera. Bill Hickman, a veteran stunt driver with years of Hollywood experience, was responsible for making the villain's car feel alive, aggressive, and genuinely threatening. His driving wasn't simply fast. It was deliberately menacing, calculated to put pressure on every shot and make the Charger feel like a predator rather than just a fast car. Hickman understood that effective stunt driving at the level this film demanded wasn't about recklessness. It was about achieving precision at extreme speed while creating a convincing appearance of chaos. Every swerve, every near miss, every aggressive lane change was carefully calculated to look out of control, while remaining controlled enough to protect the crew and equipment around him. That balance between danger and discipline was the invisible craft holding the entire pursuit together from the antagonist's side. His contribution is easily overlooked because he is never clearly visible on screen during the chase itself. Yet the Charger's entire personality, its refusal to fall back, its menacing presence growing larger in the rearview mirror, came directly from Hickman's instincts at the wheel. He also appeared as one of the hitmen earlier in the film, making him one of the few people in production who functioned as both a performer in front of the camera and a critical technical contributor behind it. The chase required not one Mustang, but two. The production used a pair of 1968 Ford Mustang GT fastbacks, each with a clearly defined role throughout filming. One served as a hero car, used for close-ups, dialogue scenes, and any shot where the vehicle needed to appear clean and undamaged. The second was a stunt car, built to absorb the punishment of the most physically demanding sequences. The stunt Mustang was reinforced with heavier suspension components and modified specifically for raw performance over appearance, while the hero car remained largely stock to preserve the clean, understated look that matched Bullitt's character. Keeping both vehicles visually identical on camera required constant maintenance and attention from the crew, and editing played a crucial role in maintaining the illusion. Cuts were timed to disguise transitions between the two cars, and small differences between them, a scratch here, a slightly different exhaust note there, were carefully managed through camera angles and tight framing. The seamless result audiences experience on screen concealed a logistical operation that ran constantly beneath the surface of production, a reminder that cinematic simplicity is almost always a product of enormous complexity, working invisibly to support it. What audiences hear during the chase feels raw, immediate, and completely authentic. That sensation was entirely manufactured. The roaring engines, the tire screams, and the exhaust blasts that defined the sequence were not simply captured live on set during filming. They were the product of a careful, layered post-production process designed to amplify every moment of speed and power, well beyond what natural sound recording alone could deliver. Real engine recordings formed the foundation. Sound engineers captured actual Mustang and Charger engines under various conditions, from idle to full acceleration. But those raw recordings alone lacked the visceral physical intensity the filmmakers wanted the audience to feel. Additional layers were recorded separately, sometimes using different vehicles or isolated mechanical components, and then blended into the mix to create a fuller, more aggressive sonic profile that matched the visual impact of what was happening on screen. Every gear change and every throttle surge was timed and mixed to align with the visual rhythm of the editing. Audiences assumed they were hearing exactly what happened on those San Francisco streets. What they experienced was a carefully engineered construction of sound designed to make speed feel not just visible, but physically present. That deliberate craftsmanship is a significant reason the sequence still sounds powerful more than 50 years after it was created. During one of the chase sequences, McQueen pushed the Mustang harder than the planned shot required and momentarily lost control of the vehicle. The car veered off an intended path, alarming the crew and stunt team, who were coordinating the shot from nearby positions. For a brief moment, the boundary between filmmaking and genuine physical danger disappeared entirely. The incident unsettled the stunt coordinators, who had already expressed concern about how much of the driving McQueen was personally handling. His skill behind the wheel was never in question. He was an experienced racer in his private life, and his ability to handle a performance car was real. But the conditions of filming on city streets were categorically different from a controlled racing environment. There were no safety barriers, no runoff areas, no second chances at the speeds the production was working with. After the incident, the production quietly reassessed which shots McQueen would handle himself and which would be handed professional stunt drivers. It was not a dramatic confrontation. It was a practical acknowledgement that protecting the film's lead actor had to take priority over the authenticity that everyone on the production was working so hard to achieve. Not every moment of carefully managed danger stayed managed. During one high-speed pass through a San Francisco intersection, an unscripted collision occurred that nobody on the production had anticipated or planned for. The impact was real, metal against metal at speed, and for a moment the crew genuinely didn't know whether anyone had been hurt or whether the shot was salvageable at all. Once it became clear that nobody was seriously injured, the filmmakers reviewed the footage and faced a choice. They could discard the shot and attempt to restage it under more controlled conditions, or they could use the raw, unplanned moment exactly as it had happened. The collision carried a quality that no amount of choreography could have replicated, a sudden jolt of real-world unpredictability breaking through the surface of a carefully staged sequence in a way that felt completely authentic. They kept it in the film. That unscripted crash made it into the final cut, and the overwhelming majority of audiences have never realized they were watching something the filmmakers never intended. It blends into the rhythm of the chase with such seamlessness that it feels deliberate. The willingness to embrace the unexpected rather than eliminate it reflects something essential about the production's instincts. Sometimes reality performs better than design, and knowing when to recognize that difference is its own form of filmmaking skill. What happens in the editing room almost never receives the recognition it deserves. Bullitt became a significant exception to that rule. Frank P. Keller won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing at the 1969 ceremony, and the chase sequence was the centerpiece of that recognition. His work transformed hours of raw footage shot across multiple days and multiple locations into a seamless, rhythmically precise sequence that still functions as a masterclass in the art of pacing. Keller's approach was defined by restraint as much as by intensity. He understood that a great chase is not built by showing everything at maximum speed from beginning to end. He varied the rhythm deliberately, holding certain shots longer than conventional wisdom would suggest, then cutting rapidly during moments of peak danger. This push and pull created a sense of escalation that kept audiences locked in without overwhelming them. The quiet moments between bursts of action made each acceleration feel more powerful by contrast. Without his decisions about what to include, what to cut, and precisely how to pace each moment, the chase footage would have remained impressive raw material without a shape or a heartbeat. Keller gave it both, and the sequence that audiences experience is inseparable from the editorial vision he brought to it. After production wrapped, the two Mustangs used during filming went their separate ways. The stunt car, worn down from the demands of the chase, was reportedly sold and eventually scrapped. The hero Mustang simply vanished. For decades, its whereabouts remained one of Hollywood's most enduring automotive mysteries. Rumors circulated persistently. Some claimed McQueen himself had tried to purchase the car back and been refused. Others suggested it had been quietly placed in a private collection somewhere, hidden from public attention. The mystery only deepened the car's legendary status over time. It was no longer simply a movie prop. It had become a piece of cultural history that nobody could fully account for. The car was eventually traced to a family that had owned it for years, largely unaware of the intensity of interest surrounding the vehicle. When its existence was confirmed and the Mustang resurfaced publicly, the response from collectors, historians, and fans was enormous. The car's long disappearance and its quiet rediscovery added an unexpected final chapter to the film's story, one that played out not on screen, but across decades of real life. One of the film's most genuinely revealing moments has nothing to do with the chase. During a quieter driving scene, Jacqueline Bissett's character takes the wheel while McQueen rides in the passenger seat. What makes the scene so interesting isn't the dialogue or the destination. It's McQueen's visible discomfort at surrendering control of the vehicle. Bissett was actually driving for the take, and McQueen's unease appears to be entirely genuine rather than performed. He reportedly closed his eyes at certain moments and visibly tensed in the seat, unable to fully trust the situation despite being surrounded by professionals. For a man whose entire sense of self was tied to being in control, particularly behind the wheel of the car, that involuntary reaction revealed something human and vulnerable beneath the iconic surface. Throughout the film, Frank Bullitt is composed, unshakable, always in command. This brief, easy-to-miss scene exposes a crack in that persona, a small but telling detail that makes both the actor and the character considerably more interesting to anyone paying close attention. At a time when most Hollywood productions relied on camera undercranking or editing manipulation to create the illusion of speed, Bullitt took a completely different path. The filmmakers committed to capturing real velocity. No slowed-down playback, no artificial acceleration applied in post-production, no tricks to exaggerate what the camera was seeing. Every frame of the chase was shot at standard speed, which meant what audiences saw on screen was an honest representation of how fast those cars were actually moving through real city streets. That commitment carried serious physical consequences. Shooting at genuine high speeds through San Francisco's hills meant every take involved real danger, with no photographic safety net built into the approach. When a car appeared to be approaching 100 miles per hour, it was because the vehicle was actually approaching that speed. The decision gave the chase a physical weight that audiences felt instinctively, even if they couldn't articulate why. Artificially enhanced speed creates a slightly detached quality that the human eye registers subconsciously. By refusing to manufacture what they could capture honestly, the filmmakers preserved a sense of gravity and real-world consequence that separated the sequence from virtually everything else being produced at the time. Not everyone involved in making the film was confident it would hold together as a complete narrative. During production and into post, genuine concerns developed that the story's slow pacing and minimal dialogue might leave mainstream audiences feeling disconnected from the material. The plot demanded patience, and patience was something not everyone believed a crime thriller audience would offer in the late 1960s. The chase changed that calculation entirely. Once the pursuit was assembled in the editing room, it became clear that the film had a centerpiece powerful enough to carry everything surrounding it. The deliberately quiet buildup that preceded the chase suddenly felt purposeful rather than sluggish. Every restrained moment, every stretch of silence, had been storing tension without the audience realizing it. The chase released all of that accumulated energy at once, and the effect was overwhelming. Critics who had reservations about the narrative universally praised the chase as something genuinely new. Audiences who might have grown restless during the quieter passages left theaters talking about nothing else. The sequence didn't just save the film from potential mediocrity. It elevated it into a cultural landmark that transcended its genre and its era. Before filming began, McQueen sought out a real San Francisco homicide inspector named Dave Toschi to study how an actual working detective carried himself. Toschi was well regarded in the department, a sharp and respected investigator whose reputation would grow even further when he became a central figure in one of the city's most notorious unsolved cases in the years that followed. McQueen spent time observing Toschi's habits, his mannerisms, the small details of how he moved through his daily work. He paid attention to how the detective wore his shoulder holster, how he interacted with colleagues, how he carried authority without ever raising his voice or performing it for an audience. These were not dramatic qualities. They were subtle, human details that most actors seeking to portray law enforcement would have overlooked in favor of more cinematic behavior. McQueen absorbed them methodically and built them into his interpretation of the character during pre-production. The influence is visible throughout the finished film. Frank Bullitt doesn't behave like a Hollywood detective. He behaves like a working professional who happens to be on camera. That understated authenticity traces directly back to the real man McQueen observed on the streets of San Francisco before the cameras ever started rolling. Casting the female lead opposite McQueen was not a straightforward process. Several actresses were considered before Jacqueline Bisset was cast as Kathy, Bullitt's girlfriend. The role required someone who could exist convincingly on screen alongside McQueen's dominant presence without competing with it for the audience's attention, a balance considerably more difficult to achieve than it might appear. One name discussed during early casting was reportedly a more established star, whose involvement would have shifted the film's emotional dynamics significantly. A higher-profile choice would have demanded more screen time, more dialogue, and a more conventionally constructed romantic subplot. That approach would have pushed the film toward traditional thriller territory, where the love interest functions as a narrative counterweight to the action. Bisset's casting changed the texture of the relationship entirely. Her presence was naturalistic and understated, mirroring the restraint that defined every other element of production. Kathy didn't exist to explain Bullitt or soften him. She existed as a separate person navigating her own honest discomfort with the world he operated in. That subtlety gave the film an emotional dimension that felt real rather than constructed. It would have been nearly impossible to achieve with a more conventionally prominent casting choice. What makes the famous chase so overwhelming isn't simply the speed or the sound design. It's everything that comes before it. For most of the film's runtime, the tone is deliberately and consistently quiet. Dialogue is sparse and functional. There are no dramatic speeches, no expository arguments designed to orient the audience, no forced emotional peaks. The camera observes rather than insists, and McQueen's performance favors stillness over spectacle from beginning to end. The restraint is so sustained and so consistent that audiences gradually settle into its rhythm without realizing what is being carefully constructed beneath the surface. That accumulated calm is precisely what gives the chase its devastating impact. When the pursuit finally erupts, it doesn't simply break the silence. It shatters it completely. The sudden shift from quiet procedural to full-throttle chaos hits with a force that would be impossible if the film had operated at maximum intensity from the opening frame. Every restrained minute that preceded the chase functions as compressed energy, stored and waiting for the moment the engines ignite and the tires begin to scream against the pavement. Every second of the pursuit that appears spontaneous and unplanned on screen was actually the product of exhaustive preparation by stunt coordinator Kerry Lofton. He brought decades of experience to production and had worked on some of Hollywood's most demanding action sequences before this film. His process began long before any cars were started. He mapped every maneuver, every intersection, every camera position in advance, treating the chase as a complex choreographed performance that had to simultaneously look completely unplanned. Each pass through the streets was designed with precise attention to speed, angles, and contingency routes in case something went wrong during a take. The appearance of reckless spontaneity was in reality the product of exhaustive preparation, careful rehearsal, and years of accumulated professional instinct. What makes Lofton's contribution so significant is that it is completely invisible in the finished film. The chase feels dangerous and unscripted precisely because he understood how to conceal the architecture supporting it. The moment a viewer senses deliberate choreography, the illusion of genuine danger collapses. His ability to manufacture controlled chaos that felt genuinely uncontrolled is the invisible craft that holds the entire sequence together, and it remains one of the finest examples of stunt coordination in the history of American cinema. Robert Vaughn nearly turned down the role of Walter Chalmers entirely. The corrupt, calculating politician didn't initially appeal to him. On paper, the character appeared to exist mainly as a figure for Bullitt to push against, lacking the depth and complexity that Vaughn typically required of his roles. He seriously considered declining before hearing the full creative argument for why the part worked. What changed his mind was a recognition that the role's power lay in its restraint. Chalmers didn't need dramatic confrontations or lengthy speeches to register as a threat. He needed to project cold institutional authority, the kind of danger that operates through phone calls and quietly implied consequences rather than raised voices and direct confrontation. Vaughn realized that playing the character with absolute icy control could make Chalmers feel more genuinely threatening than any conventionally written or physically imposing antagonist would have been. His performance became the perfect counterbalance to McQueen's quiet intensity. Two men operating at low volume, but under enormous internal pressure. Chalmers represents everything that Bullitt refuses to become, and Vaughn made all of it register through demeanor alone in far less screen time than the film's lead. One of the most persistent myths surrounding the film is that McQueen performed every driving shot himself. It's a compelling story, one that McQueen himself did little to discourage during his lifetime. The reality is considerably more nuanced. While he genuinely drove in several key shots and his skill behind the wheel was real, multiple professional drivers handled the most technically demanding and physically dangerous portions of the chase throughout production. Bud Ekins, McQueen's longtime friend and stunt double, who had already performed the famous motorcycle jump in The Great Escape on his behalf, was among those who took the wheel for specific sequences. Other stunt drivers contributed as well, each handling shots that required a level of precision or risk that the production could not responsibly ask of its lead actor during a grueling location shoot. Careful viewers can occasionally detect the transitions, a slightly different hand position on the wheel, a change in how the driver's shoulders sit against the seat, a brief glimpse of a profile that doesn't quite match McQueen's silhouette. These small clues reveal the collaborative nature of the driving. But acknowledging this doesn't diminish what McQueen contributed. He drove enough of the chase to make his presence authentic, and he trusted his team enough to let them handle the rest.